To it.
Yeah. Hey, welcome to the Monday morning data chat. It's kind of funny. It's Monday, and it's just Matt and I. So how you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well. I'm at the tail end of my trip to first Boston with you, and then I've been in New Jersey and New York quite a bit, and I'm actually heading back to Salt Lake City tonight. But it's
Very
nice
cool.
to get the band back together and just do this show together, right?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy actually. So for people who don't know the history of the Monday morning data chat, I mean, this is basically uh, so Matt and I. These are the conversations that Matt and I have all the time.
Yeah.
So what you hear in the Monday morning data chat is exactly if you were just to eavesdrop on Matt and I just talking. So, so that's kind of cool. And a while ago, we decided to record these, and this resulted in, what you see today, just the Monday morning data chat. So anyway, it's kind of cool. And it's kind of cool to be back just chatting with you about, whatever's on our mind right now. So,
well, and what's on our mind this week is reInvent. So I imagine in quite a
you're
few
talking about AWS reInvent, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Not reinventing yourself or something like that. Yeah.
Well, that too. I mean, we talked a lot about reinventing ourselves as data engineers, I guess. But yeah,
or whatever.
AWS
Yeah.
reinvent. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So I think that we're going to go through these announcements in a bit. I thought it was pretty cool. It was, I think, for as we'll get into kind of the analytics releases were pretty minimal. I noticed, but there was a constant theme of just serverless. I think there was a lot of cool stuff with SageMaker. I happened to travel down there for a day just to go see some partners and record a podcast. I think that was really cool.
It might have been a super spreader event. I guess we'll find out. But possibly.
Yeah, that was awesome. But pandemic notwithstanding, I think it was really cool just to go down there. I mean, it wasn't crazy like I would say other conferences, but this is not a normal time right now for conferences or in general.
Not at all.
So I don't know what you would expect, but it was cool. I think the main thing I noticed is it was just really cool. I think people were mainly interested in just reconnecting with each other too. Selling is one thing, but I think just getting out there and reconnecting in person, that's cool. That's one thing I noticed.
Yeah, so I really hope that Omicron dies out quickly without much of an impact, so that we can kind of get back to normal life. Everyone,
whatever that is,
go get vaccinated so we can get back to normal life. We appreciate it, frankly.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's get into this though. Let me share my screen here. We can kind of go through the announcements.
I'll make one general comment about serverless, and that is there are kind of two leaders broadly in the serverless category. So AWS itself, I mean, even something like S3 is a really fantastic serverless service, but especially AWS Lambda, for example. The other market leader in serverless is Google, and like things like App Engine, BigQuery, and PubSub are serverless, and have been for years and years, even before the term serverless was invented. And one of the themes on the data side for reInvent this time was, frankly, making a lot of similar AWS services serverless, which we'll talk about in just a moment.
Yeah, maybe just blow this up here. Serverless, the big announcements really, and I think you do point out, I mean, AWS, I consider them still the leader in serverless, especially when you talk about things like Lambda, for example, right?
Oh,
I mean, that was, I mean, it kicked off the whole serverless revolution. I think there were things like this sort of going on before, but, functions as a service, but the serverless Lambda kicked everything off. And I think AWS Lambda is one of the, most fully baked offerings that AWS has. It's beautiful. So, but serverless now, it's extending into the analytics realm in AWS. I would say this is an area where they were actually behind,
quite far behind
other companies, right?
Yeah, Snowflake and BigQuery. Frankly, I mean, Redshift was the market leader for a long time, right? They kind of became popular before anyone else. If you look at the history, BigQuery was available at the same time, but frankly, Google did a very poor job of marketing it. And I think Redshift did a lot to get columnar databases out in the world, but then they got eclipsed by other technologies.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I think 2012 Redshift was released, and that ushered in the wave of sort of the modern era. You could call it the modern data stack or whatever you want to call it these days, but it really did, I think, kick open the doors of just cheap analytical compute for the masses, right? And that was a big difference. But the problem with Redshift is it was still a lot to manage, and then BigQuery I would say it had always had some semblance of serverless when it was released, but
Yeah.
it didn't have SQL as a first class dialect until several years ago. And so, I think BigQuery had a problem just positioning itself as a competitor to a data warehouse for a bit, but that's
Yeah.
long gone, and now it is, right? So,
Well, and at the time, Google just wasn't much in the cloud space, right? I mean, when did they finally get Compute Engine? Like, it took them a long time to even get proper VMs. They had App
right.
Engine, which was super advanced, but it was almost too advanced. It's like, well, companies just didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, actually, that brings up a good
Yeah,
point. So I would say serverless may have actually started in some sense with App Engine back in the
yeah.
day,
App Engine, BigQuery,
but
PubSub.
I remember
Yep.
seeing it in like 2009 or 10, and I was like, I have no idea what the hell this is. So just
Yeah.
sort of just backed off. But serverless is now making its way into Redshift now, and I had a chance to check this out over the
Mhm.
weekend. You can expect to see a video on this later this week. So yeah, you have the choice now of running Redshift, either as a provision cluster as normal, or you can try out the preview of the new serverless option here. So, what are your thoughts about Redshift going serverless?
So I kind of have two big questions. And one of these you brought up yesterday, and that is, what are the costs going to be like for Redshift Serverless? One really nice thing about Google BigQuery is that their baseline pricing model is very transparent. It's actually not based on CPU. It's just based on how much data you scan, which incidentally, AWS Athena has the same model, but it's just
Yeah.
$5 per terabyte. That's it. And so you can have a query that runs for 5 hours and scans a terabyte and it still costs $5. So I think that one open question about Redshift Serverless is for standard workloads, how much is it going to cost? And then the second big question is how is the performance going to be? So in other words, is it going to equal the performance of owning your own cluster? Is it theoretically going to exceed that performance by offering really rapid scaling? And that remains to be seen. But to be fair, we're still kind of in this beta phase, and it may improve quite a bit before it goes gold.
Yeah, I mean, that was my biggest question when using it. I was just like, how am I going to be charged? Because they give you this notion of
Mhm.
Redshift processing units, but it's sort of like Wonka bucks or like Shroot bucks if you watch The Office, where I'm like, I don't know quite how this translates into consumption. So if you read the docs and what they call RPUs, Redshift processing units, it says basically you can start with a baseline, think of what 32, then you can just add increments of 8 all the way up to 512, I believe. Right, and so I think it's 45 cents per RPU per hour.
Okay, see, interesting. And so, in other words, there's probably no notion of scale to zero at this point. You kind of have to have it turned on, and then it's going to consume a baseline number of credits. Is that correct?
Well, it'll shut itself off after it runs a query, but my question is, you don't have any notion of, okay, so this query will run this many RPUs, for example. So
Yeah,
it's more
yeah.
of a, I think you're gonna have to do trial and error on it. As far as I can tell, you can definitely set consumption limits where you're not going to run queries for more than maybe say an hour a day or something like that. But that's the big question mark I have is just how do you control costs? And maybe I'm just missing something in the docs. I don't know, but so BigQuery makes it really obvious where when we're talking about serverless data warehouses here right now, for those who are listening. But BigQuery makes it pretty obvious because it tells you how many bytes you're consuming before you run a
Yep.
query, right? Snowflake makes this, I would say, somewhat obvious in the sense where at least you can control the amount of the type of data warehouse you're spinning up. You can spin an extra small or whatever Excel variant you want to do. But with Redshift Serverless, I didn't see the capability of controlling of any knobs it can control with respect to how consumption is is done by the by Redshift. So anyway, that was my biggest question. But as far as performance, it seems to run just like good old Redshift, as far as I could tell.
Nice.
I was using the sample data set, so I'd like to try it on my own and sort of benchmark that against other data warehouses out there, including Firebolt. I'm very curious to see like how Redshift serverless compares against low latency query engines, like Firebolt and similar. So anyway, stay tuned. I'm going to be doing a series of videos, probably just first introducing Redshift serverless to you. But I'm glad that AWS is doing this. They needed to catch
Yeah.
up in this area, frankly. So
Exactly. And, frankly, in terms of market share, it wasn't BigQuery necessarily that was crushing them. I think BigQuery started to grab more market share, but it is really Snowflake that they're
it's
trying to
just
compete
directly at
against.
Snowflake.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that leaves, I mean, there's a big open question here, like how does Snowflake respond? And we've seen a lot of activity on their product map happening. So, interesting things maybe coming down the pipe. We'll see how they respond to this. But I'd be really curious to see if Snowflake came up with their own serverless offering.
Well, stay tuned.
Yes, we'll see.
Yeah, actually, Ed Mitchell has a question. I guess we can maybe address this question now. It's kind of related to BigQuery. He's consulting for GCP and Looker. He'd be interested in hearing comparisons to other clouds.
Sure. You want to take this? You want me to? Or
Just compare GCP and AWS, and stuff, so we work in a ton.
Yeah. So in truth, a lot of things on GCP I find more cloud native than AWS. So I'm not here to like trash talk AWS, but networking is way simpler. We mentioned BigQuery serverless has been since it was introduced as a product. So it's been that way for almost a decade now. PubSub is serverless. So PubSub is Google's competitor to Kinesis, basically. So it's like your streaming messaging bus, that's serverless. The downside with GCP is there's just not as much mindshare out there. So in other words, it's much harder to find engineers who know GCP. Like they can learn it, but it's much, much easier to find AWS engineers
for sure
in general. And then in certain product domains, like Amazon is much, much more mature. Like I think Google Compute Engine is very mature at this point, but EC2, like everyone uses EC2. It's got all kinds of exciting features. It's can be a pain to configure networking in EC2, but there are so many people who know how to do it that it's not really a big deal. So that's kind of my basic take. The other thing is that there's a lot of evolution happening at GCP right now. So we'll see how that continues. I think some of it has maybe happened faster than I expected, and other projects have kind of dragged on where they promise features and they kind of have taken a while to deliver. So especially enterprise-oriented features. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a fair comparison. AWS is definitely where I think a lot of companies are going to start, just because app developers, especially, a lot of them just know AWS. So you're going to pick the app development environment that you're comfortable in. And, if you're writing your application, in a cloud, the chance of you migrating, or starting a data stack in a different cloud, I would say, is not that appetizing to a lot of companies still. You're probably going to, if you're in AWS, you're going to stick in AWS. Just like if you're in GCP or Azure, for your application, you're probably going to build your data infrastructure that way, just because it's a lot easier to do. Multi-cloud is becoming more and more popular, but I think we both see that companies, they want to stick, they just want to reduce their footprint, basically, right? So
yeah.
Now, as far as I think, back to BigQuery and Redshift, for example, Edward has this question here, and he says he's doing, BigQuery is 90% for him.
Yeah.
And he also makes his comment here that BigQuery allows for slot reservations for a fixed cost model. This is definitely true.
Right.
With Redshift, for example, you can allocate, you can reserve pricing if you want to, for various types of costs. Just go on the Redshift pricing page and just look at the various types of pricing they have. It's actually very nuanced, right? So you can pay for on demand, you can pay for storage, different tiers of that. You can pay for concurrency. Now you can pay for serverless. So there's no shortage of ways to pay.
Well, one of the really nice things about BQ's slot model is that you can have a big company that has a bunch of different BQ instances, basically, each with their own slot reservation. So say your marketing team has a reservation, data engineering has a reservation. And then when I'm not using my reservation, someone else in the company can take it. There's like a hierarchy. The slots can get redistributed automatically, which right now, if you're just reserving a Redshift cluster, that's actually a cluster of virtual machines. Like it's actually real infrastructure running behind the scenes. So right now you can't do this just yet, but I'd be curious to see if they come up with a slot type model like this for their serverless product. So again, you could redistribute those resources across teams when they're not being used.
I'm sure that's coming. It has to, right? So there's no other way, because right now, if you're just charging an on-demand price of X dollars or cents per RPU per hour, that's it's billable per second still. It rounds up to an hour for the 45 cents. That's still cheaper, or that's still more expensive than, say, if you just had a single node. I think it's kind of where you need to, if you had a single node cluster running like the baseline, I think it was 24 cents per hour still or something. So point being, it's one of those things where I'd say definitely go try it out. AWS is actually giving you $500 in free credits right now to try out serverless. And so I would just say try it out and see how your queries perform and how much credit you're consuming. And maybe this is a good route to go. I would say for variable and unpredictable workloads, serverless would be a great thing to do rather than just having a Redshift cluster always on. So
yeah. And the thing I'm curious to see as well, and I need to just spend some time with the product in beta too, but The pain point with Redshift over the last several years is that Amazon kept adding features to it. RA3 nodes. Now you can separate compute from
Right.
storage, but it was just always such a pain to manage. There was so much configuration involved. Whereas with Snowflake, there's almost no configuration. BigQuery, virtually zero configuration. And so I'm hoping that Amazon can come up with a product that's very performant and very little configuration and economical too.
For sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's look at some other announcements here. So on the serverless end, you also had Kinesis data streams on demand, stream data at scale without managing capacity. This is actually kind of cool. If you've
Cool.
managed Kinesis, I think it's a great product, except when you have to provision sharding capacity and stuff. So, so anyway, here's the article about that. So, and a lot of this, what is this? Is the top announcements of reInvent 2021, right? So I'd say, like, obviously, we're not going to read these articles to you. Just do a quick Google search and read them for yourself. We want to highlight the ones we're pretty stoked on here. And I think this is one of them. Just because Kinesis, again, was pretty, I don't know, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. Just having to manage shards and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly right. And the other pain point with Kinesis is that this is, core infrastructure. So if you're doing anything like real time, or even if you have applications that message each other across Kinesis, you want the ability to very easily scale capacity up and down. And the pain point was that it was actually harder to scale Kinesis than it was to scale EC2 up and down. And so you could have, your sites getting bombarded with a bunch of traffic on Black Friday. You could spike up your EC2 instances, but you'd have to actually go in and do more work to adjust your Kinesis capacity. And so I think this is really smart on Amazon's part to kind of catch up with Google in terms of making this offering serverless. And it's going to drive other spend, frankly, right? If your messaging bus can scale up quickly with no intervention, then you're going to be able to scale up your EC2 instances that depend on that more easily too.
Yeah. I mean, how competitive do you think? Obviously, we're going to try this product out and give you. We're going to do another video recap here, but I would say this starts, at least on paper, putting Kinesis, sort of in competition with something like PubSub, which is truly serverless.
Yeah.
The thing I always liked about PubSub was you just kind of like set it and forget it. It just runs. I remember reading, a few years ago, Spotify, about their tests they did before they went to GCP, and they tried out PubSub, and I think they threw like, 2 or 3 million messages at it out of the gate as a test, and it just worked. So that's pretty cool.
I consider it like PubSub is like a benchmark cloud native service. In other words, if you were to rethink basic data processes from the ground up in a cloud native way, massively multi-tenant, scale to zero, scale up dynamically, hyperscaling, PubSub was that for message buses and queues. And so, it's exciting to see the other providers jump in, and I'm excited to see how Kinesis serverless evolves.
I mean, again, though, the on-demand, I mean, it's still, though, right? Your default capacity is 4 megabytes per second and 4,000 records per second.
Yeah, so it's
healthy, and you can scale it up to 200 megabytes per second or 200,000 records per second. So it's better.
Yeah. I mean, we also teach at University of Utah, and one of the things we like about a lot of Google services that you can turn them on, and they're basically free because they do start out scaled to zero. Like if you just turn on a PubSub topic, you just create it. It doesn't cost a dime. It costs nothing because you pay as you go. You pay per message, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So let's Kinesis data streams again. We'll be checking this out. Expect a video on that too.
Yep.
So what else are we stoked on? Lake formation. This is something I actually caught in the hallway of
interesting
at reInvent. Yeah, I was just listening to the keynote, kind of listening to it as I was walking, and so this is pretty cool actually. So lake formation is obviously AWS's framework and system for managing data lakes, surprisingly enough. But now you have cell level governed tables. I think that's actually pretty cool. It basically brings just more layers of security to the data lake, which is sorely needed. For the longest time, I mean, we'd see people just throwing everything into S3, frankly, and there was your data lake. We call that data lake 1.0. Now 2.0 has a level of governance, right? And so this is pretty table stakes. I mean, Databricks does a lot of this stuff, and I would say this is becoming the norm. So I'm glad that AWS is definitely keeping up with lake formation, and cell level security. I think is awesome. Actually, that's pretty dang cool. So
it's something you really need, right? And fundamentally, it's kind of the difference between something like a Snowflake or a BigQuery, where fundamentally these are data lake products that run on top of S3 or
yeah,
Google Colossus, respectively. But the problem with the traditional data lake 1.0, like you were saying, was that you didn't have any data management capabilities. In other words, permission controls were very poor. You had no way of deleting data, cell level permissions, just a thing that didn't exist. And so now we're starting to see, I feel like Databricks is the market leader in this domain, but everyone else is rushing to catch up to turn the data lake into something like a data warehouse.
or a lakehouse.
Or a lake house, as the case may be. Yeah. And I remember, you've talked about what happened when GDPR dropped and how there's just panic because in data lake 1.0, companies couldn't even delete data. They didn't have the capability to do it. And
No, so I mean, the clumsy approach is we'll just get rid of anything
delete
older than
everything.
X number of days, right? And that
Yeah.
puts us in compliance with GDPR. And
Yeah.
I saw a lot of, I would say reaction, right? I wouldn't say overreaction because you don't know what, especially when GDPR dropped, it's like you don't know what the outcome of that's going to be. So you're not compliant. Well, cool. Now you get to deal with that headache. So
Yeah.
better to err on the side of being compliant. I was actually just writing about this morning in, in our upcoming chapter on storage about, data retention and compliance. And I actually bring up that example. So it's kind of funny, but mention that. What other announcements we got here of serverless stuff here? I thought I saw something for serverless EMR, but that's in preview. So we're going to check that out at some point. AWS event notification with an event bridge. That's pretty cool. You can react to changes in your S3 objects. I think that's pretty wild. I'm curious, just to kind of see the natural evolution of S3 as maybe, because you take lake formation, right? And you take these things that are basically triggers, right? With this announcement here, I'm just curious, how much S3 ends up becoming like a database, functioning like a database, in the future. Right now, it's object storage. Obviously, you can put file formats on top of it and make it behave like a database, but it's still, at the end of the day, not quite like a database. But with stuff like this, it becomes much more integrated into your applications. And so, I don't know. Any thoughts on?
Yeah, I'm curious to watch that evolution too. I will say that S3 is very advanced. I would say that Google was more advanced in specific domains with Colossus in terms of how it's integrated with BigQuery. And so on the S3 side, like Athena kind of did something similar where Athena is really, really deeply hooked into S3. And we're probably going to see more evolution in that direction where S3 can behave. And the interesting thing too is that this may give, if they can leverage it, this gives Amazon an edge against Snowflake because Amazon has low-level access to all their systems. Like their internal engineers can access things in S3 that Snowflake is just not going to be able to. So,
but what does Snowflake use for the storage of its data?
Yeah, exactly. It's S3. Yep.
So who wins in either case?
Yeah, the consumer should win in every case, right? That's what we
Exactly.
hope to see. So,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What else we got here? Lots of cool stuff in AI. Actually, this is the machine learning stuff is actually what I was most excited about. You had what is it? SageMaker. Where is it? Lab, Studio Lab. I signed up for this. I'm on the wait list, so we'll see what this is. When you read about it, it looks like it's basically a version. It's open source Jupyter Lab. It sounds a lot like Collaboratory, which is Google's free products. If you have a Google account, you actually have access to free Jupyter notebooks that are amazing, actually, for my own
deep learning, right?
And deep learning, you can spin up GPUs. I think you can spin up a TPU with Colab, and if you have a Colab Pro account, you have you get priority access to this stuff. Colab's awesome. And so I thought it was interesting because I was wondering, okay, so when's AWS going to have the same sort of a thing? Well, maybe this is it. Like I said, when they inevitably accept my spot on the wait list, I will let you know how this goes. But it's pretty cool. I think anything we can do to get data science products in the hands of the masses, especially giving people the power of SageMaker, for example, I think that's awesome. So let's see where this goes. But for those who want to sign up, I'm sure there's a link in this article here. Go sign up, try it out. If that interests you. Some other announcements that I found was interesting. SageMaker Inference Recommender. And so this basically gives you a chance to test your models before you choose the right architecture, at least as far as I can tell. And so it gives you, So this is pretty cool. It's using ML to do ML, but this saves you a lot of time in terms of choosing like the right architecture. What do you think? What are you thinking?
Well, so I mean, this looks a lot like they're offering a service that does hyperparameter tuning for you. Does that sound correct? I mean, there are many different types of hyperparameter tuning, but it sounds like their intention is to take over a lot of hyperparameter tuning to make the lives of machine learning engineers easier, which frankly, hyperparameter tuning is a lot of the job in many cases.
Well, I mean, they've had things like that for a bit.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I'd like to try this out and just see like what exactly it tweaks. Stay tuned on that. So I think a lot of this is just to help you like figure out what, because there's no shortage of ways you could host like your hosting for your inference, for example, right? And like, so I don't know. Curious.
Yeah.
This is cool.
Yes.
So training compiler. What I like about this is it basically helps optimize your model code to take advantage of efficient use on GPUs. That's pretty cool. So again, want to try this out. I think they did something so with Hugging Face, when it was able to reduce model training time significantly. So that always helps. So again, if people are interested in reducing it, I think this is probably for bigger models. I don't think you need to do this on your Hello World, MNIST, but if you're doing it on a large model, this could save you a lot of time and money. So definitely check it out.
And among other things, they're pitching it as a way to more easily get Python kind of experimental training code into production, like taking your Python kernels and automatically converting them into production kernels.
Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'm stoked to see it. I mean, they're actually, I think as far as the ML workflows go, I think that SageMaker is probably leading the charge, because every time they make announcements, I feel like the other clouds are having to keep up. I think GCP for example, has some tremendous ML capabilities, but I really think that SageMaker just has the workflow of a data scientist and ML engineer, just I think a bit more dialed, it feels like. So again, stuff like training compiler, stuff like Inference Recommender. I mean, these just speak to the problems that you would only know if you were just doing this kind of work. So
yeah, AWS is very pragmatic that way, right? Like from the inception of AWS, they've done a very good job of initially coming to software developers and saying, here's something that makes your lives easier. And now they're doing the same thing for machine learning engineers.
Yeah, exactly. Let's check this out here. So what about Canvas here? SageMaker Canvas. I was actually pretty stoked on this, mainly because I've worked on these types of products in the past. Basically, no code, visual capabilities of letting business analysts build machine learning models. This is actually incidentally how I got into data engineering, surprisingly enough. That's a story for another day. But this is cool. I think of all the things I saw, this is potentially one of the more interesting ones, in my opinion, because this brings data science to the masses. Again, the term citizen data scientist has been bandied about for, I think almost 10 years now. And I think it's a bit trite, but I still think the goal is good, where you're democratizing a lot of, at least basic machine learning capabilities to the masses. I think that's awesome. So some people may disagree with me, but whatever. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on Canvas?
I mean, I'll ask you this question. The critics of services like this always claim that they're dangerous and that if you misuse them, you can do severe damage to your business. Like, what's your response to those ideas that you see out there?
You could say that about any tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
that's accurate.
I mean, you could say that about cars as well.
Yes.
Right.
Very true. Cars.
So, so I mean, there's no shortage of things I think that are potentially dangerous for you. I will say there is a kernel of truth to this, and I've actually espoused these ideas as well, where I think, to some extent, machine learning, when it's inappropriately used, and I'll get into that in a second, is dangerous, right? So this requires that you understand both the inputs and the outcomes that you're trying to, I guess, go for it, right? So I notice I didn't say outputs. Outputs, I think, is a driver for outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you can very blindly do machine learning, thinking you're doing the right things, and then your models, maybe the data is wrong that goes into it. That's the input part. Maybe it drives the wrong things in your business, hence outcomes. I think everyone likes to beat up on Zillow for this. I think maybe they are kind of a poster child of what we're talking about. Maybe not. I don't know the inner details, so it's easy to pick on somebody when you don't know what's going on. But I think people are accusing of basically grossly, overly using profit, for example. I don't know. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, it has to do with, again, what are the outcomes you're driving for, and so forth. And are you able to, I guess, are you able to respond to those in time, right, before you blow up? So
exactly, and that's what I would say about this. Just if you're deploying a product like this, think about what your risks are. So, like, what's your worst case scenario in using a model? Like, what things can go wrong? Think about that from the beginning, and then you kind of want basic model monitoring techniques. And by that, I don't mean that you need to know, everything about statistics and linear algebra, but you need to watch what your model is doing and just have some basic sanity checks. So if something seems to be going off the rails, maybe you disable it.
But hey, you know what? I'm going to tell you about a tool that's used a lot that could have I guess contribute to bad outcomes. It's called Excel.
Yes, I completely agree.
Right. So you want to talk about something that's been around for a long time that has driven, I think, great outcomes, and maybe not some so great not so great outcomes. Look no further than the humble spreadsheet that but everyone still uses it. I don't see people picking on it saying, well, people shouldn't use spreadsheets because that could lead to bad behavior. It's an absolutely stupid argument.
Right. I mean, the bad behavior to do with Excel, there's the whole story about austerity, right? The whole austerity policies were driven by bad research and bad Excel spreadsheets. But that more had to do with taking one research paper and interpreting it as a new, way to define the economy, and then deploying that as government policy. That was disastrous. And so same thing here. Just be careful with these models. Think about what their impact can be on your business, and look at outcomes, just like you said.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Ed Mitchell says data scientists have very low control of how the products are used. That makes it yeah, exactly. I mean, so again, I don't see any problem with unleashing tools like Canvas, Data Robot, whatever, into the world. I think it's a good thing. What it means is you have potentially more power, to crunch numbers.
Yeah.
But numbers at the end of the day are inert things. They're numbers, right? It's what people do with the numbers that matter, right? So Zillow, for example, what does that say on the follow-up? How do we know it wasn't just about the cost of trying to scale and something that has been traditionally small scale? Possibly. I mean, I know a lot of people that flip homes, right? But I think it's but I can tell you this, though, trying to forecast in a dynamic environment where things are changing, 30, 50% in a year. I can tell you what happens with these forecasting models. I've used enough of them. They don't work.
Yeah.
Right. Unless you expect that prices are going to continue reflecting the immediate past, because these models weight the immediate past more than the further periods of time. And so if you're blindly following these models, you're an idiot. That's what I have to say about that. Right. You don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't blame profit, nor would I blame any other data science tool. I would just say the user didn't know what the hell they were doing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And go read all of Nicholas Nassim Taleb's books. They're kind of repetitive and they're kind of trolly as well. Frankly, he likes to just tweak people, but he
just like us.
We do, yeah. But I see so many MBA programs read the Black Swan now, and I feel like most people coming out of those programs don't quite get it. They think that somehow you can still predict the future, and it's like, no. The more unpredictable, unexpected events you've just seen, the less predictable the future is.
Yep.
So after COVID, it's like anyone's guess what's going to happen. So you just try to
day to day. When people are trying to forecast after COVID happened, right? And then you start seeing these. Let me see. Housing prices go up in ways you've never seen them go up before.
Inflation,
let's use profit for that for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And in general, just the real estate market, it seems like, has changed. I'm sure you have a lot of opinions about this, but now at this point in my life, I've seen two major real estate kind of big upheavals. First the last economic crisis, and then COVID. And so that's just a little over 10 years apart.
Well, actually, I think you lived through the savings and loan crisis back in the day too.
I did.
There was a housing. I think
don't really remember that one
too.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but yeah, so it's interesting.
Yes,
so,
yes, it is.
Jake Carter says he agree. I think you must get the tools into the subject matter experts in the domain. They have to be part of the learning loop. Hittle, I'm not sure the trading, buying, how's it scale? You have to have strong risk and cash management in place, regardless of the model and how good. That's for damn sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think you talked about Nassim Taleb, for example, right? I mean, he has this notion of being anti-fragile, which means not just not dying when things go bad, but I think thriving when things go bad. But at a minimum, you need to be robust, to these types of failures. That means having cash on hand where you can weather risks. I mean, flipping houses, I know people that flip houses in this environment right now. It's crazy. You can make a lot of money, but you know what you have to do? You have to be really fast at flipping your house because the prices could change. And you have labor and costs and materials and everything else that are just unpredictable right now. Like everything about it, like you really have to know what you're doing. This is not, I don't think this is a game you do at scale either. But Zillow, I think, also thought that they could like manipulate the market in some ways because they had, if you have if you have all the homes in an area, then maybe you can control and the listings, and the mechanism by which we advertise prices and signal, and maybe you can drive the price. But I think that at least for them, probably not. So.
Well, and you have the problem that other people may decide to play your same game against you, which if you want to, we brought this up before, but read about long-term capital management and the Black-Scholes equation to see what can go wrong.
That's a big one. No, I spent a lot of time studying the Black-Scholes formula in grotesque detail. I know how it works. I know how it can blow up. That thing is not meant for the real world.
Right. I mean, if you take an equation that's meant to model a random process, Brownian motion, literally it's based on Brownian motion.
Yeah.
But then you start injecting feedback from that random process. It's not a random process anymore.
Right. And it also assumes normal Gaussian distributions of processes, which inherently, especially when you're talking about abnormal events, those aren't normally distributed. So anyway, we're talk reinventing anyway.
We'll come back to
nerding out. We'll talk about reinvent later. Let's nerd out on
we can have a recap on
models
next week. But I mean, I think I don't see this stuff talked about enough in the data science and machine learning space. I think we spend a lot of time talking about neural nets and dimension reduction and clustering. And those things are all important, but it's also important to understand how models break and how the present and the future can be very unpredictable. And I feel like even with COVID, we haven't really learned our lessons from that, which is everyone operated from a position of hyper optimism. So in other words, we saw this happening in Wuhan. It's like, well, maybe it won't come here. Why don't we just pretend that it's not going to come? It's not going to escape from Wuhan, that it's not going to get to the United States. And then it did, and we all threw our hands up and panicked. It's like, okay, maybe it won't come to the United States, but don't be so optimistic that you assume that it can't come to the United States.
You know where I was in December, right? For the audience, I was actually in Wuhan in December 2019, traveling through there. And a few weeks later, I started hearing about how they shut the city was about to be shut down. It's like, what the hell is this? That ain't good. And so, my dad lives in Asia, so he started sending me messages about what was going on there. And I think we started getting ready for something in January, actually. And so, I remember, telling some friends that, we were probably not going to be going to Google Next, which was in April. This was back in mid-January, late January. We were telling people this, and they're like, "Why? You're crazy." It's like, well, I don't know. We'll find out. And so, but then they messaged around March, like, "How the hell did you know this?" Like, it's not really, anything we predicted. I would just say it's something we prepared for, right? So it's not like you can predict the date and the outcome of something, but I would say at least we were farther ahead, I would say, than a lot of people in getting ready for whatever was coming. So it's interesting. I think this type of stuff should be taught to data scientists more, though, in the sense of just it's as Jake Carter points out here. I mean, he's done a bit of trading in his life. Long-term capital management had little to no cash risk management based on the actual risks they were taking, right? I mean, they almost had to get a bailout, right? That almost sunk a lot of stuff, but
the economy,
but they, they're running pretty thin for sure.
Right.
Whereas you compare that to a Berkshire Hathaway, for example. I mean, they have what, $140+ billion in cash sitting around, dry powder, as they call it, waiting for whatever's happening. So I think it's it's interesting. But I wish this was just taught more. I would say like just risk preparation needs to be taught more for data scientists. I think it's one thing to give people tools, AutoML, for example, right? But again, notice how I always talked about outcomes in that discussion, right? It's inputs and outcomes. What are the outcomes that you're trying to produce in your model? Because if you aren't clear on those, for things like product recommendations, for example, I think it's pretty innocuous, because it's like, if somebody doesn't buy this product you recommended, maybe they'll get something else. Like, that's pretty innocuous.
Yeah, you can damage your existing business, right? So maybe people will end up buying a little bit less if you recommend the wrong thing versus no recommendation at all. That is a risk, and that's something you need to take into account. But if you're buying a lot of real estate like Zillow, what's the worst case scenario? Well, the worst case scenario, they didn't even get hit by the worst case scenario. That's the funny thing. The worst case scenario is that you buy all this real estate and the market sinks by like 5 or 10% suddenly.
Right. Yeah, they blew up in the middle of like a housing boom.
I know. Yeah.
So, exactly. That's what's bananas about this. But I mean, I'm not here to pontificate on these companies. I mean, I don't know what happened there either. I can just say, from the outside in, and just some of the stuff I've heard. Again, maybe I'm wrong, but I would say, if I'm wrong, then take the general case that they still don't want to blindly rely on models. It's just, I would say just, anything you do should at least have some buffer for the consequences if things go wrong, right? And so that's, again, to bring it back to AutoML, I think that the things I notice when people use automated machine learning tools is that there's almost this blind trust that you're going to get a prediction. And that's what people want. They want the prediction. Because with the prediction, that gives you, some sort of clarity into the future. But I was reading Ray Dalio's new book last night, The Changing World Order, and it was interesting. He had this quote in there where, I guess it's an old Wall Street saying, but people who spend too much time with crystal balls end up eating, broken glass or something like that. For somebody who's been doing this kind of stuff for a really long time, trust me, that's true. It's kind of weird. I think the more you do this kind of work, the less trustworthy you are, or the less trusting you are of these types of models and approaches. So just because where they can go wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm fond of this platitude. It is kind of a platitude, but that is that you can only really predict the present. And what I mean by that is so much of data science and machine learning is actually just oriented towards understanding the present. So for example, a recommender, what are you really doing? We're really looking at what people are buying right now and then getting other people to buy similar things. Predicting the future remains really, really hard and actually basically impossible. And most of the time it works okay until something blows up, and then your predictions are completely destroyed very quickly.
Yeah, especially right now when things are just dynamically changing so fast. I mean, again, we're still in a pandemic. I don't know, what is hard to understand about that. Like, things change quite wildly right now. But I know a lot of people who are, trying to, it's funny. I see. I know some friends who are, they're studying time series forecasting because they want to learn how to predict stock prices. They can bet on them, and these are all meme stocks they're trying to bet on too. And I think it's hilarious because the first thing is you don't tell anybody like what algorithm you're using, because all I need to do then is just like see the output of that and then take the other side of that bet.
Right.
So
thinking how much money they're dumping into the market,
especially
with meme stocks, where everyone just piles on.
Yeah, and I know this other guy. He's like trying to like, buy energy futures because he's trying to predict like the polar vortex in Europe or something. I'm like, but unless you're doing this full time, I think you're in and out of your league. So anyway, it's
even if you are. I mean, a lot of people.
Even if you are,
burned.
It's
very, very smart people have gotten burned on this.
It's so hard. So that's why I would say caution. With especially these AutoML products. It's like I think it gives you a false sense of confidence, but really, you do need to understand your data. You do need to understand your business at the end of the day. It's as simple as that. So, but that's anything really. Even if you're not a data scientist, you should understand your business. I think it goes without saying, but
yeah, unquestionably, and understand your risks, right? I think in the business world, and we running a business have found this too, you always want optimistic projections, right? You want to say, okay, how big can I build this business in the next year? Like if I go out and work really hard and find a lot of new clients, how big can I make my business? But you also, the thing we don't do as much is, like you were saying, focusing on the anti-fragile side. In other words, saying, okay, what if Omicron turns out to be bad? Or what if X, Y, and Z? Like these scenarios that actually are pretty probable. And when I say pretty probable, it might be a 10% probability. It might be a 5% probability. That's still something you need to take into account, because the outcome can be catastrophic. I mean, maybe if you have a golden parachute and, when that hits, you can just bail out of the plane, fine. But if you're planning for the long-term future of your business and not just to take a bunch of options and depart, then you should be thinking about these things.
Yeah. And there's things like COVID too, which I would say, for companies like ours, like I remember when COVID first hit, it was scary. It was scary for everybody. It was scary for our customers. A lot of our customers, our future was uncertain, to be frank. I think we're considering, okay, do we continue this,
shut
or do
it
we
down?
go somewhere else? Right. I mean, this is a real consideration, but this is a real question that everybody had with their business or their jobs. And we saw a lot of people get laid off from good jobs. And magically, a month and a half later, all these companies are doing really well, and they hire all these teams back. I'm talking, a lot of, digital first companies here, not restaurants, obviously, but, so that was surprising. And then I would say, I'm glad we stuck with it, because, COVID last year ended up being just insane. Like it was crazy how much, I always like to say COVID pulled the future forward by about 5 or 10 years. And that's exactly what happened with a lot of companies. It's, so our business bloomed, and, to the point now where we built the team, and, it's been a really fun ride. But I think if we hadn't taken the approach that we did with respect to cash management, with respect to our somewhat being tightwads and conservative to a large degree, we wouldn't have made it, right? Like we would have been underwater. But I think because we just run super lean, and and I think just have a really good operation. Like we were able to not just weather that, but survive. And here we are today. But I don't know what the future brings. Honestly, it's a very dynamic world right now. So.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, the nice thing is that if you prepare for the future, then at least you can avoid panicked decisions. In many cases, I think what happened is companies laid off workers because they panicked, and they actually put themselves in a bad position, because when the market rebounded, when online sales rebounded a few weeks later, they were not well positioned for that. And had they been in a better cash position, just a bit more conservative, they could have said, all right, let's wait a couple weeks and see what's going to happen here, because we don't know what's going to happen. I think in general, panicking is the wrong move, and it's very much a human tendency, the fight or flight thing.
I just had to change the title of our
data science and risk management. Yeah. I mean, well, there's a bunch of recovering data scientists who are talking about this. Maybe this is why we're recovering, because data science, machine learning are super, super useful. But I think we've both seen it somewhat abused by people who are not necessarily using automated tools, by people with a lot of training and PhDs who just get a bit too optimistic about what they can accomplish sometimes, or about the limits of data science and machine learning.
Right. Oh, this happens a ton.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what are you seeing though? I sense that, I would say a few years ago, the conversation was really, let's be ML first, let's do AI, but I think now it's been a sobering realization that, one, this stuff's really hard, because you need to set a foundation and you need to get data. It's surprising how many companies we see that, a lot of companies we talk to, I would say they start out doing AI and they're like, well, crap, we don't have the data and we don't have the processes or the systems or the frameworks to do machine learning or AI. So, but so it seems like the conversation has changed a bit, where I think before everyone was very eager. I think now people are a bit, and I think rightfully so, a bit more conservative in their approach. I mean, what are you seeing, or what are your thoughts?
I feel like there's good news and bad news on the data infrastructure side. And so the bad news is that there are no magic bullets. In other words, like you're saying, you can't just suddenly set up a data science practice in your company and expect to get amazing results if you don't have the data, and if that data is not in shape. So for example, that data may exist in Splunk or something where you really can't process it in an interesting way. Like, you can do log searches and such, but you can't get like sound statistics out of it. And you're going to have to do some work to turn that into a valuable product, right? But the good news is that you don't need to run out and sign a multi-million-dollar data warehouse contract or a Hadoop contract or something.
The vendors will tell you otherwise, though.
Vendors will tell you otherwise, but you can just go to AWS or Google or Azure and spin stuff up. And if you can get a team together that can work with data, you can have infrastructure almost immediately, and you can start taking that log data or whatever kind of interesting data you have and start working with it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what we do for a living. Like that's the entire driver of our data practice, basically.
It is. Yeah, and you got to take it with a grain of salt, because I think a lot of what we're talking about is our observations are very self-selecting, because people select us to do stuff. Therefore, that's the world we live in.
Right.
So if we were really good plumbers, we'd be talking about plumbing emergencies and the niche that we found ourselves in there. Prepare for the future. I mean, plumbing ain't a bad gig, actually. So.
Rip out your copper, replace it with PEX or whatever we'd be saying.
I've actually thought, if I weren't doing data, what would I be doing? And like, actually, plumbing is one of the industries I thought about. I don't know if there's an analogy to data engineering, but I just think it's a solid. Maybe because I just remodeled my house, and like these guys, they make a lot of money, and there's so much nuance to it. There's no way this thing's going to be automated anytime soon. No way.
Yeah. I feel like if you're really reliable and you're good at business and you have the skills, completely agree.
Yeah, we do like blockchain plumbing or something, maybe an NFT with plumbing or something. I don't know. Kick it up a notch, transform the industry, disrupt it. Joking. So.
Well, watch out. Like someone's going to start that company. It probably already exists, right? I mean,
maybe AWS they'll start it maybe they'll have like a plumbing as a service or something. Actually, highly doubt it. But
I gotta go back and look at their managed blockchain services and see what happened with that.
Well, they have the quantum computer too. Yeah, what was that? That was anyway. Yeah, blockchain service. I'm curious how that's going too. But yeah, it's cool. I mean, the thing I like about them is they're always like at least on top of stuff. Whether or not it makes any sense at all, they still have it. Yeah. In fact, let me just let me see here. Share my screen.
Yeah.
So just look at something. What's that?
I mean, IBM has tried to do the same thing, and they've kind of fallen on their faces quite a few times recently. They had their own like blockchain services. I don't think that's doing too well now, and it's disappointing because I would love to see IBM actually make a comeback and be a player in a variety of domains.
Why?
Well, is it more cloud competition, right? More cloud competition is good.
It's true. But they hired a new CEO. He's supposed to be focused on the cloud, so we'll see where it goes.
Let's see where it goes. Yep.
But they got but now Amazon bracket hybrid jobs, set up, monitor, and efficiently run hybrid quantum classical workloads. I have no idea what that even is. We should try this out. We got a bunch of AWS credits we can blow through.
Why not? Do we need to use them by the end of the year? We have Google credits we need to use by the end of the year, right?
What are some of these other announcements here? Let's look at storage real quick since we're back on here. So thanks for listening to our TED Talk, by the way, on the
it's not even a TED Talk.
It's the data science
stuff today. So
but it's this is again. Welcome to the Monday morning data chat with Matt and I. This is literally. Again, when we started the show, we were just like, let's just record how we talk all the time. And this is like Matt and I can talk for hours, and we sometimes do. And it's exactly this. So what you're seeing right now is literally no different than Matt and I just nerding out, on a Zoom call or in person. But I don't know, anything catch your eye with storage here? We're big fans of S3.
Yeah, so they came out with a new type of Glacier. Basically, so traditionally, original Glacier,
instant retrieval.
Instant retrieval, yep, which is similar again to what Google has. Now, I'd
cold line,
yeah,
that's cool. I was writing about this too today. Cold line storage, and the fact that sending your data in to archive is easy. It's cheap to store. Getting it out, it's a different story.
Yeah, it's almost in the book, I call it a type of insurance. It's like a reverse type of insurance where the insurance actually pays out for Amazon if you need to retrieve that data. Very, very cheap to store. But if you have an incident where you need to get it back, it could cost you a lot of money.
Okay, so storage pricing here is relatively cheap, right? For 4,000. Yeah, it's pretty good. Data retrieval is,
that's actually not bad. Yeah.
I mean, again, you get it instantly, right? Versus, I mean, I don't know if you ever tried getting data from the old Glacier, but
right.
I mean, they called it Glacier for a reason.
Yeah, it was deliberately slow.
I mean, those things take millions of years to work their way through a mountain range, and I think that, to get your data back from original Glacier, we're taking just about as long, actually.
Yeah.
So, so you have entirely new geographies by the time you get your data. So let me see what else is there.
Still, no one knows what AWS Glacier is, right? What it runs on. I was texting with one of my Amazon friends. She's like, "Oh, well, they have piles of unsold CDRs. That's what it is. It's like secretly unsold CDRs they're using." Back in the day. So.
That's pretty funny. Huh. Yeah, let's look at any other announcements here that we may have not picked up on. Robotics is an interesting one too. RoboRunner's new robotics service that makes it easier for enterprises to build and deploy applications that help fleets of robots work seamlessly together. I'd be curious to actually try this stuff out. I don't know. It just sounds kind of cool. So yeah, I mean, what else they got? I mean, this is all actually, the stuff that I like to spend a lot of time on is all this stuff. This isn't the stuff we normally talk about in the show because it's boring, but even though we are talking about it in the show. But this is all the stuff I think that makes data engineering better is the stuff like we just talked about, like Glacier Instant, for example, site-to-site connectivity, for example, all the networking stuff. If you're a data engineer, I would be focusing on this stuff because this is the stuff that makes your job easier on a day-to-day basis. The big tools are the big tools like Redshift Serverless. That's awesome. But say you need to, I guess let one service talk to another, right? That's networking.
Yep. And it turns out we do have to do a lot of networking. If it gets real hairy, I try to bring in a proper network engineer, but I know enough to at least recognize what's going on and give people general advice.
This is kind of cool. Enhanced letter queue management for SQS. That's interesting. We have to try that out. Use a lot of SQS. Fun stuff. So AWS again. Oh, let's look at this real quick. Databases. DynamoDB. You get infrequent access now. That's pretty awesome. So an RDS custom for SQL Server generally available in case you're using that. So yeah, again, no shortage of announcements. I think it was a good reinvent all in all. It was, definitely not the, big one that, was 2019. I think they had like 60, 70,000 people there, but again, it's a fun event. I'm glad they, put it together and so forth. Just go through some of these comments and questions here. Auntie, you guys are my favorite data duo. Always interesting, informative, fun to hear you banter. Yeah, thanks. That means a lot. So that's awesome.
It's a bit dangerous to go off the cuff like this, but so far it hasn't gone completely off the rails, I think.
Well, I mean, we stick to our netting though, right? It's not like we're talking about like fantasy football or something of which none of us are.
No.
Maybe that'd be a fun show. Maybe we should do it just to see how stupid we sound.
Maybe we should do fantasy football one season with data just to see how much we can ruin it, like how bad it will be.
Well, how about we do this? You do it with data and I'll do it without, and we'll see who actually performs better.
Okay. I've never done fantasy football.
Guy Thompson, he asked, what was the AWS partnership with Dish Network about inclusion of 5G network? I'm not exactly sure on the details. I did hear about this when I was at reInvent, but I don't know any of the details. So I would say just go look it up and find out what's available. But I know that there was some sort of announcement with Amazon 5G, and so don't know much more than that. But it sounds
private 5G, right? It was something like that. So, but again, I haven't read up.
But yeah, I'm not sure what that means, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it sounds cool, but
yeah, so very much so.
Well, awesome. Let's see, do we have anyone? What is next week for Monday Morning Data Chat? Is it just us again, or do we have somebody on? Actually, I think next week. No, we don't. Okay, yeah, I think it's just us again. So we'll announce our next topic next week. So
there are a few people we could invite on. Let's see if we do that. We could invite Mary Claire Thompson potentially. She's going to be on sometime. I don't know if it'll be next week. She's a data engineer with Duke University, and doing some interesting stuff in terms of teaching data engineering. So let's see if she can come on maybe next week. So yeah,
that'd be cool. And I would say too, for the audience out there, drop me a message. YouTube, LinkedIn. If you have any topics you want us to talk about, happy to do that. I think it'll be, because it's December, a lot of the guests that we've had on, I don't think we're gonna be having on that many guests because everyone's doing stuff for the holidays, and rightfully so. So yeah, you just get the Matt and Joe show, and we'll just see our viewership staying steady or decline as a result. So I guess we'll find out soon enough. But yeah, it's fun anyway. And
you've got to be more outrageous. You've got to get more into shock jock mode to really make this work.
Okay.
That works well in business, right? Like just say shocking, ridiculous, offensive things.
Well, it's funny. I was listening to the All In podcast this morning, Jason Calacanis' podcast, that he does with Chamath and a few other people. But yeah, I mean, I think they do a good job at being at arguing with each other and being dramatic. I think it's a fun podcast. I was literally listening to that in a run right before I had to set up here. So maybe we'll have it more like that, or kind of WWE style. So maybe we'll do it in person next week, and then we can like have chairs. We can beat each other with them or something, like in pro wrestling. So
can we set up a ring with like those? What are those things even called? But the ropes across the side.
Like the turnbuckles.
The turnbuckles. Okay. Yeah.
You didn't build wrestling when you were a kid?
I mean, I watched. Yeah, it was the thing back in the '80s, right? Like everyone watched wrestling. It's been flushed from my memory now.
Oh man, I was way into wrestling as a kid. Like I used to go to all the WWF matches back in the day. Got to see Randy Savage a few times. He and Jake the Snake Roberts. He had his snake that he'd bring out at the end. And who else? Hulk Hogan, obviously. That was a fun time. That was a really fun period. Miss those days. So yeah, and then me and my friends, we would make like crappy little belts out of cardboard, and then we'd have wrestling matches in the backyard. So backyard wrestling back in the '80s was pretty. It's where it all got started, man. So
a lot of injuries back then.
we injured a lot, yeah. And that brought us to today. So
yes, here we are.
Anyway, so thanks to the audience for sticking around and listening to Matt BS. So again, if you aren't subscribed to our YouTube, check it out at Ternary Data. Also sign up for our newsletter at ternarydata.com. We have exclusive content every week that you can only get on the newsletter. It's as never, if it might be rarely published if it's a good article, but normally we don't publish them. So you can only get it through the newsletter. We also do not actually have archives to the newsletter. That's by design. So sign up, check it out. And also check out our book on O'Reilly. The early release chapters of Fundamentals of Data Engineering are out. Getting a lot of good press on that. I think it's going to be a great seller next year. And I think it's going to help a lot of people understand data engineering. Anything else we're missing here?
I'll just say on the book, like if you read the chapters, we love to get feedback at this stage because we're going to be finishing out the draft, and then we'll be revising previous chapters and going back and revising everything, and then finalizing the book for next year. So if you're a data engineer, go read it and let us know what you think.
Yeah, I'm stoked, man. We got so many good reviewers to the book right now. It's so thankful to have the people that we have working on the book, and thanks everybody for the support of the show and what we're doing. It means a lot. So see you all next week and have a good one. Bye.
Take care.